Let's talk about the genetics of the economy and what that has to do with us. Okay, so we're going to cover bonds. We're going to cover what the bond market means to the economy. We're going to cover what all these things mean to you and I and money in our pocket. I'm over here in Tokyo, Japan right now, and I'm going through a whole bunch of different factors, looking through a whole bunch of different numbers, and I'm thinking through this in this entire video, and I'm going, you know what, I want to share a little bit of a story. When I started, or when I was growing my second business, and oftentimes when I think about credit, the credit system, and if we're looking at the transaction as the simplest factor inside the economy, like I want to go buy a soda, here is cash that I earned from being productive. Here is that cash for this soda. This is a straight up trade, right? Essentially, it is a trade. Now, if we look at credit and going deeper into this, I think a lot of what we're dealing with right now with bonds in the bond market is something that sort of came to light over a long period of time that helped handle the expanding growth in the birth rate for the population of the planet, right? And so, and I'm going to paint this picture here is that I was expanding my second business, or actually my first business, and I did not have the necessary cash. Okay, so I needed about $16,000, and my grandfather, I knew had this money, and so I had gone to him. He said he would lend me this money, but he would want this paid back in full. Okay, so if we're looking at this, $16,000. He would want it paid back over a time frame of 5 years. So at the end of 5 years, he would get the $16,000 back in his pocket. And every single year, he would get a payment of $500. Okay, so let's just say simple math off the top of my dome, close to 10%, right? Something like that. So every single year, that would happen. Now, and then that would be over a 5 year time frame, and then I would put this money into my business, and in turn I would grow my business. I would get a quick return back. When I asked him about this, I get a quick return back and then pay him back the initial note, the initial $16,000. When I asked him about this, the biggest thing that he came up to me with was, all right, I want to see your line items. I want to see what your, what is your, what's your financial statement look like? How much debt do you have in the company, and how close is the line that we're drawing here? And things ended up going smoothly, and of course within 2 years, because my grandfather had done really well, like financially, he was just like, hey, just keep helping me shovel snow and doing things like that. We were privileged, and in this case with my grandfather, my parents didn't have any money, but my grandfather did, and he never made me pay him back. Now, where does this have to do with anything? So I want to shift, and I wanted to paint that picture now with the U.S. government. So if we're looking at the U.S. government, I'm actually walking around here in Tokyo thinking through this lens because they have some interesting factors that they do with their bonds, and they actually own quite a bit of U.S. treasuries. Okay, so what ends up happening is that every single year the U.S. sets a budget, and since 2001, we've only had a budget surplus one time, and I think that was in 2000 or 2001. It might have even been a little bit earlier than that. I'm pretty sure it was Bill Clinton was the last one. But if we go back and we look at this, every year, okay, the government has to have a budget to order military planes, to take care of interstates, to deal with Medicare, welfare, to deal with, off the top of my head, any type of, and even government regulations, right? So all of those things, infrastructure, all of those things, education, all of those things go into the system of the budget. Now, they pay for this budget, or in theory, they would pay for this budget from taxes. Okay, so we would look at payroll taxes, corporate taxes, a little bit of excise taxes, and then personal taxes. Okay, now the difference between the amount of taxes that they're going to bring in, which in the case of my scenario would be the amount of revenue I was bringing in my business, the amount of taxes that they're bringing in, okay, is what they have cash on hand, essentially, and then what they have different between the money that they are getting from taxes versus what they're spending is going to be the deficit. Okay, now the deficit is an annual aspect, so annually that deficit, okay, gets rolled. If they can't pay it all, it gets rolled to another year and it gets added to the debt. Okay, so think debt is long-term accrual, deficit is just that 1 year, year to year to year, okay, based off the budget and how much money they're bringing in. So what do? They sell bonds, okay? And essentially, if you think about the scenario I provided with my grandfather, he provided me with a bond, which was $16,000 face value. I had to pay him $16,000 face value after 5 years, and then every single year I had to pay him $500. So he was getting that 10% is essentially the yield that he was getting off of that bond. Now, in this case, the bond that the U.S. government is putting to auction, the bonds could be anywhere from 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, right? And based off of each level, they will have a certain amount of a certain level of interest that they would put on there to provide some type of stimulation to get that bond lent to them from corporations, insurance companies, individuals like you and I, foreign governments, all of these things. Okay, now the risk is currently, if we have too high of a debt, okay, $25-30 trillion, there can be a point in the very long-term future, and if this would ever happen, we would have a lot bigger problems than actually not having our debt paid back on. But there can be an issue where a lot of people who are buying these bonds start to get concerned that they won't be paid back. So that's one aspect. The bigger aspect in the bond case is if we see the rate, so instead of it being, let's say, 3% or 4%, and which is pretty high, but let's say it's 3% on the bond payment year over year. So every year the government pays you 3% of a bond that you got at an auction. If that percentage increases because people aren't interested in lending the money to the U.S. government, so to attract new lenders, what they have to do is they have to increase that yield. Okay, so they have to increase that to, let's just say in the case of Argentina, 44%. And then what ends up happening is that can, in theory, draw in more people, but one of two things happens. Either it becomes more expensive to service the debt for the government, or they can't do it. In the case of Argentina, I think they've faulted on their debt like 6 or 7 times, something outrageous. So the risk then is if it's a high debt service, okay, for the U.S. government, let's say that they have to raise this to 5 or 6%, or that's what the market's calling for because no one's buying it. Okay, so the rate increases. The problem then becomes now there's no money going into the market, into the stock market, because in this case, if you have a 5 or 6% return on a bond that's very stable, very safe, because you have the U.S. government paying it back, you're almost sitting there going, well, why would I invest where I might get 7 to 8% on a stock that comes back? And what happens if that stock goes belly up? Like, I don't get anything, but if, I'm going to get that money back from the U.S. government. So the issue there is inflation or people not investing into the stock market, which decreases liquidity. And so the reason why I look at the bond market as this genetic makeup, okay, and then I look at revenue, expenditures as like the bloodline, the genetic makeup is this sort of endless cycle, this endless loop, and a lot of people will say this is a pyramid scheme, but I think in reality, governments establish, and even you can look at like the Genius Act, the right now, like even with crypto, we're setting up and we're involved with how the economics of the world are going to roll, right? The government, as much as everybody hates to admit it, plays a huge role in how fruitful the economy can be. Now, there's a large gray area for should you lean one side, should you lean to another side with how much that government should play a role. But if we are able to service the debt and we're able to build, better roads or better train system like they have here in Tokyo, which is absolutely freaking ridiculously phenomenal. It's unbelievable. Or you're able to have a better military system, or you're able to have a better medical system or educational system, whatever it is. You're able to handle your elderly a lot better. Well, now, in that case, there's that super gray area of how to balance that. But if you're doing that as a government, you're then stimulating a lot of jobs, you're then stimulating a lot of different sectors, and then that leads back into the growth of the economy, okay, and into the private sector. And then ideally, when it leads into the private sector, now they pay more taxes and things can roll along this way. So it's sort of just this constant feedback loop. But when the bond system and when we're not doing a good job balancing our budget, and when we're wasting a ton of money and things like that, and we're not handling things well, and the bond yield goes higher, you're going to be less likely to invest in the stock market, which can then lead to greater problems, which can then decrease the amount of taxes that the government collects, and in turn, over a long period of time, have a huge negative impact on you and on your mortgage rate and things like that. And so understanding the genetics of the economy and the genetics of money, and then looking at that and then saying, okay, that's establishing how everything can sort of roll and grow. And then the economy is the bloodline. The economy is cash flow. And so that's how I wanted to sort of pitch this and explain it as a drill for myself, but also as a drill for you guys out there as far as understanding bonds. Understanding you can invest in them and they're a really safe, stable place to be, but we've got to be aware of the impact that they have, because there's a lot of indicators that we can see from the bond market that will then carry over and sort of show us, if we're looking at certain yield curves, at the yield curve and things like that, that we can then see, hey, we might be entering into some type of traumatic or turbulent time frame. And so all these things even have an impact on crypto. Okay, so if even to the point where it's like, well, if the yield is higher on the bond and it's super safe, like I don't need to go into crypto. But and you can buy. I did want to finish this off, because even like a municipality, a small municipality, you can get bonds through brokerage accounts and stuff like that. And even a local area, a local municipality might be building like a stadium or something. And they might say like, hey, to the township or to the greater city area, hey, we're trying to get bonds set up for this for the next 10 years. If you want to support this project, it's going to help fuel the local economy. And so it's an interesting part of the economy that a lot of people don't pay attention to, but it has a huge role. And I think that I again think a lot of it has to go back to the rapidly growing birth rate back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. I know it started before that, and it's a historic thing, but when you're looking at things now, our birth rate's starting to slow down, and we don't want immigration for some reason, and that can have a negative impact on the bond market as well. So to finish up that story with my grandfather, I remember him telling me, I'm going to lend you this money, and this is going to be a bond, okay? But you got to increase the number of jobs. And we went from having 3 people working at our business to now having over 15 people working at our business. And that does show you the power and the impact of the bond system, even the genetic system, the genetic makeup on that small economic experiment there. So hopefully this helps somebody understand bonds in as simple as a fashion as possible. If you want me to go into terminology and things like that, I can try and break that down for you a little bit further. Until next time, please like, subscribe, share this. Peace.